Answered in kind. 96. What are we to believe, and why? There is a question beneath many questions, and it is older than any one religion, older than any argument, older even than the anxious human need to be right. It is this: what are we to believe, and why? Not merely what should we repeat, not merely what should we inherit, not merely what should we parrot to make others comfortable, but what are we truly to hold in the inward chamber of our being as worthy of trust? Because there is a difference between belief and compliance. There is a difference between faith and reflex. There is a difference between conviction and catechism. And in our day, as in every age, many people are asking not from a place of illumined certainty, but from a place of inner vertigo, outer pressure, and inherited alarm. You hear it in the tone of the question. What do you have to lose by believing in God? It sounds innocent enough, perhaps even tender, but beneath it often lies a hidden presumption, namely that belief ought to be easy, immediate, and socially transferable, as though the human soul were a door that could be opened by command. Yet, the soul is not a latch. It is not a mechanism. It is not a nervous little instrument that simply obeys whoever speaks the loudest. Real belief is not contraband. It cannot be smuggled into the heart by threat. It cannot be manufactured by pressure. It cannot be conjured by repetition alone. When belief is sincere, it arises from encounter, from experience, reflection, conscience, longing, rupture, mercy, recognition, and the slow, often arduous alchemy by which a person comes to say, yes, this rings true within me. Without that inward assent, all you have is performance. All you have is recital. All you have is a mask that has learned how to move its lips in the right direction. And that is why coercive belief is so spiritually questionable. Because once belief is detached from inward integrity, it ceases to be belief in any vital sense and becomes a species of self-betrayal. A person may say they believe because they fear rejection, because they want community, because they are exhausted, because they have been trained to confuse submission with sanctity. But if the thing being demanded requires them to violate their own conscience, then what is being asked of them is not faith, it is abdication. This matters greatly, because many people imagine that the purpose of belief is simply to belong to the right camp, recite the right formula, and avoid the right punishment. But such an impoverished notion of belief is morally and spiritually inadequate. Belief is not supposed to make a person smaller, flatter, more frightened, more suggestible, or less truthful. Proper belief, if it deserves the name, ought to ennoble the mind, clarify the conscience, and enlarge the capacity for compassion. It ought to make one more honest, not less, more humane, not less, more discerning, not less, more merciful, not more compliant. Yet, much of what passes for belief in the public square is actually anxiety in ceremonial attire. It is fear wearing a polished badge. It is tribal insecurity dressed up as spiritual concern. A person sees someone who does not believe as they do, and instead of meeting that difference with calm dignity, they become agitated. Why? Because the presence of a non-believer does not merely challenge an idea, it disturbs an identity. It introduces a crack into the wall of certainty, and some people, rather than looking through the crack, rush to plaster it over with urgency, volume, and accusation. This is why so many religious conversations become strangely theatrical. The issue is rarely just truth. It is control. It is reassurance. It is the desperate human wish not to be alone in one's worldview. The question is not merely, do you believe? But more subtly, can you help me feel secure in what I believe? That is a very different matter, and if we are honest, it explains a great deal of the fervor, the shaming, the circular arguments, the ominous warnings, the emotional blackmail, and the peculiar habit of treating uncertainty as if it were a moral crime. But uncertainty is not a crime. Uncertainty is often the beginning of honesty. And honesty is what so many of these conversations lack. Take, for instance, the old and dramatic language surrounding Lucifer, Satan, rebellion, cosmic pride, and the idea that some angelic being wants to be God. Much of this is repeated with enormous confidence, yet little historical care. People speak as though they are reciting granite truth, when in fact they are often repeating a long sediment of interpretation, imagination, folklore, translation, and inherited dread. They are not always speaking from revelation. They are speaking from a narrative they absorbed early and never examined. What is striking is not merely that such stories exist, but that people are often more attached to the emotion the story produces than to the truth the story can withstand. The tale of a proud light-bearer falling from heaven is gripping. It has grandeur, terror, drama, and a ready-made villain. It is emotionally satisfying in the way a thunderstorm is satisfying from a safe window. But fascination is not the same as discernment, and morbid fascination with cosmic villainy can become a diversion from the more sobering, more productive work of the soul, examining one's motives, refining one's character, and learning how to live in truth. Indeed, one of the reasons such stories persist is that they are useful to the anxious mind. They simplify reality into a stage play of good forces and evil forces, obedience and rebellion, insiders and outsiders, saved and unsaved, believers and unbelievers. But life is rarely so cleanly partitioned. Human beings are far more complicated, and the spiritual task is not to flatten them into slogans, but to perceive them accurately and respond to them lovingly. That requires a much sterner kind of thought, not harsher, but sterner, not colder, but more exacting. Exacting thought asks, what do you mean by that? Where did you get it? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it humane? Is it actually yours, or did you inherit it without testing it? These are not rebellious questions. They are responsible ones. They are the questions of a mind that does not want to live by second-hand conviction. And this is where many people become uncomfortable. Because if belief must be tested, then belief is no longer a social accessory. If belief must endure scrutiny, then some cherished narratives may not survive. If belief must be consonant with conscience, then not every command from tradition will be obeyed. If belief must be genuine, then pretending is no longer permitted. And for some, that is intolerable. They would rather inhabit a rigid certainty than risk the vulnerability of truth. Yet, truth does not fear examination. Truth may be hidden, but it is not fragile. Truth may be resisted, but it is not diminished by honest inquiry. It is only falsehood that requires constant performance. Falsehood must be protected by volume, repetition, intimidation, and the policing of doubt. That is why some people become so concerned with whether others believe. Their concern is not purely pastoral, it is existential. They are protecting a structure within themselves. And what about the one who does not believe? What about the one who says, I have not seen enough? I have not been convinced. I cannot affirm what I do not know. Such a person is often treated as though they have committed an offense. But perhaps they are being more reverent than the one who speaks too quickly. Perhaps they are honoring the seriousness of reality. Perhaps they understand that to mouth assent where the heart has not consented is not virtue. It is corruption of the inner witness. This is why the demand, just believe, can be so spiritually shallow, because it collapses the distinction between knowing and pretending, between inward assent and external mimicry. A person may repeat a creed and remain untouched. They may echo the vocabulary of faith while remaining absent from its substance. They may assent in public and betray themselves in private. But truth is not impressed by theater. God, if God is truly God, does not require actors. A gentler and more honest question would be, what is worthy of trust? What kind of God would ask me to violate my conscience in order to please a crowd? What kind of truth requires me to stop thinking? What kind of holiness depends upon fear? What kind of wisdom cannot survive examination? These are the questions that mature a soul. These are the questions that rescue a person from credulity on one side and cynicism on the other. Because the alternative to coerced belief is not necessarily nihilism. It is not necessarily emptiness. It is not necessarily defiance for its own sake. The alternative may simply be honest seeking. It may be the reverent admission that some things are not yet clear. It may be the willingness to say, I do not know, but I am willing to know. That is not weakness. That is nobility. That is philosophical temperance. That is spiritual hygiene. It is far better to be an honest seeker than a frightened imitator. People are often not upset that someone else lacks belief. They are upset because the other person's freedom implies that belief is not automatic. It must be encountered. It must be received. It must be lived. And that means no one can be bullied into genuine faith. One can be coerced into compliance, yes. One can be trained into repetition, yes. One can be shamed into silence, yes. But genuine belief? Genuine belief requires something rarer and more holy: consent. That is why inner integrity matters so much. The soul does not flourish through chronic self-alienation. A person who continually violates their own inward testimony eventually becomes divided, thin, and brittle. They lose contact with their own center. They may look devout, but inside they are fragmented. They may appear secure, but inside they are estranged. They may speak of truth, but they have ceased to inhabit it. So what are we to believe, and why? We are to believe what is worthy of our trust. We are to believe what survives honest inquiry. We are to believe what harmonizes with conscience rather than overrides it. We are to believe what enlarges love rather than weaponizes fear. We are to believe what makes us more truthful, more merciful, more courageous, more patient, more humane. We are to believe slowly enough to be real and deeply enough to be transformative. And why? Because the aim is not merely to have a belief. The aim is to become a person who does not need to counterfeit conviction in order to belong. The aim is not to win arguments by volume or by piety theater. The aim is to live in such a way that truth becomes visible in character. There is a radiance to that kind of life. There is a sobriety to it. There is a peace in it. It does not shout because it does not need to. It does not coerce because it does not fear. It does not demand blind assent because it is already anchored in clarity. So let others ask, what do you have to lose by believing? A better question is, what do I lose by pretending? What do I lose by surrendering my conscience to a script? What do I lose by letting fear impersonate faith? What do I lose by accepting a story simply because it was handed to me with force? And the answer is profound. One loses oneself. Therefore, let it be honest. Let it be brave. Let it be tested. Let it be humane. Let it be free enough to grow and humble enough to admit when it does not yet know. For only then does belief become something more than a slogan. Only then does it become a living relation to truth. And only then does it deserve the name.